My name is Marissa, 27 years old, and I always thought being the perfect daughter would make my parents proud. I built my marketing career in Chicago, worked hard for everything I owned, especially my Honda Civic, that represented years of saving and sacrifice. My brother Jackson was always their favorite, though, but nothing prepared me for that Thanksgiving dinner when my parents casually mentioned they had sold my car to pay for his honeymoon. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had family take you for granted. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a typical middle-class home with a neatly trimmed lawn and holiday decorations that went up like clockwork every season. My father Richard worked as an accountant at a local firm, bringing home a steady income, but always emphasizing the importance of careful budgeting. My mother Diana taught English at the local high school, beloved by her students, but somehow never quite as impressed by my own academic achievements. Then there was my older brother Jackson, 5 years my senior at 32, who seemed to walk through life with an invisible shield of parental approval. From our earliest days, the pattern was clear, even if unspoken. When Jackson played Little League, my parents never missed a game rearranging their schedules and driving hours for tournaments. My dance recitals, however, often saw just one parent in attendance, usually my mom slipping in late after handling something for Jackson first. In high school, Jackson was average academically, but excelled at baseball. My parents spent thousands on private coaching travel teams and equipment. Meanwhile, when I maintained a 4.0 GPA and made the debate team, their response was typically, "Good job, but don't get too focused on schoolwork to enjoy your teenage years." The debate team trips often became financial discussions with subtle suggestions that perhaps I should consider less expensive extracurriculars. I still remember the Christmas when Jackson received a used car for his 16th birthday, a Ford Mustang that needed work, but still a car. My father and Jackson spent weekends bonding while fixing it up. 2 years later, when I turned 16, I received driving lessons and was told I could use my mother's car on weekends if I helped with grocery shopping. When college applications came around, Jackson received extensive help from my parents, researching schools, visiting campuses, and preparing applications. He ultimately attended a private university with tuition that stretched my parents' finances. They took out second mortgage to help cover his expenses, telling him not to worry about working during college so he could focus on studies and baseball. By the time my turn came, the family college fund was depleted. My parents sat me down for a practical discussion about community college for 2 years before transferring or considering schools that might offer academic scholarships. I worked throughout high school to save money, applied for every scholarship I could find, and ultimately attended State University with a partial scholarship and student loans that I knew would follow me for years. Despite everything, I loved my family and craved their approval. I studied marketing and business, graduated with honors, and secured a job at a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago. Moving away from Milwaukee was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I could define myself outside the shadow of being Jackson's little sister. The first 2 years in Chicago were tough. My entry-level salary barely covered rent for my tiny studio apartment and student loan payments. I took on freelance projects on weekends, worked evening shifts at a local coffee shop, and tracked every penny. My social life consisted mainly of free community events and potluck dinners with coworkers who became friends. My biggest goal was saving for a car. Public transportation in Chicago was functional but limiting. Winter commutes meant waiting for buses in sub-zero temperatures, and grocery shopping required careful planning for what I could carry home. Every month I put money aside, watching the car fund grow slowly but steadily. After 3 years of saving, I finally had enough for a down payment on a used Honda Civic with 80,000 miles. It wasn't fancy, but it was reliable, fuel efficient, and most importantly, mine. I still remember the day I drove it off the lot, the first major purchase I'd made entirely on my own. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. That car represented everything I had worked for: independence, responsibility, adulthood on my own terms. It meant weekend trips to explore Wisconsin state parks, the ability to visit friends in neighboring cities, and no more trudging through snow with groceries. I took immaculate care of it, learning basic maintenance from YouTube videos and saving for regular professional service. My parents seemed proud when I told them about the purchase, though my father's first question was about the interest rate on my auto loan, followed by suggestions that I might have found a better deal if I'd consulted him first. Still, I detected a note of respect in his voice. My mother sent me a car emergency kit the following week. Our relationship had improved somewhat with distance. During monthly phone calls, I shared carefully edited highlights of my life in Chicago, focusing on work accomplishments and omitting struggles. They shared news from home, including updates about Jackson, who had moved back to Milwaukee after college and was working at my father's firm as a junior accountant. Despite our history, I still hoped for their approval and looked forward to visits home. Each time I drove my Honda back to Milwaukee, I felt a small surge of pride, tangible proof that I was making it on my own terms. The car was more than transportation. It was validation. When my brother Jackson announced his engagement to Sophia Marshall, daughter of a prominent Milwaukee family who owned a chain of successful car dealerships, my parents were ecstatic. Sophia was beautiful, well-connected, and came from the kind of wealth my parents had always respected from a distance. The match elevated Jackson's status, and by extension, the family's. I was happy for my brother. Despite our complicated relationship, I wanted him to find happiness, and Sophia seemed to genuinely care for him. During our occasional interactions when I visited home, she had always been polite, if somewhat distant. I looked forward to having a sister-in-law and potentially building a closer relationship with my brother. As we moved into new phases of life, the engagement brought a flurry of activity. My mother called weekly with updates about venue options, florist consultations, and catering tastings. She mentioned casually how Sophia had exquisite taste, which apparently translated to expensive choices. Though the Marshalls were contributing to the wedding, it became clear that my parents were stretching themselves financially to meet the standards expected. I wondered briefly how they were managing the expense, but didn't ask directly. My father had always been private about family finances, treating questions about money as slightly impolite unless he initiated the conversation. Besides, I assumed they knew what they could afford. As Thanksgiving approached, I looked forward to the break from work and the chance to reconnect with family. The holiday had always been important in our house. My mother's turkey and homemade cranberry sauce, my father's ceremonial carving of the bird board games in the evening. Even with the underlying tensions, holidays usually brought out the best in us. The week before Thanksgiving, I noticed something odd during my regular Sunday call with my mother. She mentioned how excited she was about Jackson's honeymoon plans, describing the luxury resorts in Bali and Australia they were considering. When I expressed surprise at such an expensive trip, she paused before saying, "Well, your father and I are helping them a bit. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and we want it to be special." She quickly changed the subject, asking about my drive home. Would I be leaving Wednesday after work or Thursday morning? I mentioned that the 6-hour drive in my Honda would be easier on Wednesday to avoid holiday traffic. And she made an odd comment. "Oh yes, about that," she said. "There have been some changes around here. We'll talk when you arrive." I thought she might be referring to house renovations, or perhaps they're considering a move to a smaller place now that both children were gone. It never occurred to me what those changes might actually mean. The drive from Chicago to Milwaukee was familiar and nostalgic. As the city fell away and Wisconsin farmland rolled past my windows, I felt the usual mixed emotions about going home, love and longing combined with a vague anxiety. I stopped for coffee at my favorite halfway point, a small roadside diner that made surprisingly good lattes, and texted my parents that I was making good time. When I pulled into my parents' driveway Wednesday evening, I noticed a new landscaping arrangement in the front yard and fresh paint on the shutters. As I parked behind my father's car, I realized Jackson's vehicle wasn't there yet. I was the first to arrive. My parents greeted me with hugs at the door, my mother holding on a beat too long, my father patting my shoulder awkwardly. Something felt off about their welcome attention beneath the surface, but I dismissed it as wedding stress. Jackson and Sophia would be arriving tomorrow morning, and perhaps they were just saving their excitement. Inside, the house smelled like my childhood pumpkin pie and the oven cinnamon candles burning in the living room. But there were new additions that surprised me. a large flat-screen TV replacing their old model new kitchen appliances gleaming under the lights, and what looked like new furniture in the living room. "Mom, did you redecorate?" I asked, running my hand along the butter-soft leather of a couch that must have cost several $1,000s. "Oh, just a few updates," she said, exchanging a quick glance with my father. "We decided it was time to make some changes. Do you like it?" "It's beautiful," I said, genuine but confused. My parents had always been frugal driving cars until they nearly fell apart, and keeping appliances for decades. This sudden splurge seemed out of character. That night we had a quiet dinner, just the three of us. The conversation felt stilted with my parents asking polite questions about my job and apartment, but changing the subject whenever I mentioned future plans that involved my car weekend trips. I'd been planning a camping expedition in Michigan next spring. At the time, I thought nothing of it. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, Jackson and Sophia arrived in his new BMW. I hadn't known he'd upgraded from his previous car, and when I commented on it, he smiled broadly. "Wedding present from Sophia's parents," he said, putting his arm around her waist. "They wanted us to travel in style." Sophia smiled, perfectly highlighted hair falling around her shoulders, diamond engagement ring catching the light. She was wearing what looked like a cashmere sweater and designer jeans for a family Thanksgiving, while I had packed my nicest non-work clothes, which suddenly felt inadequate. "Marissa, it's so good to see you again," she said, air kissing near my cheek. "That sweater is so cute, very retro." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, but I smiled and helped carry their overnight bags to Jackson's old room, now converted to a proper guest room with a queen bed and coordinating furniture. My room, in contrast, remained frozen in time with the same twin bed and desk from high school. The day proceeded with traditional Thanksgiving preparations. I helped my mother in the kitchen chopping vegetables and setting the table with the good china that only appeared on holidays. Jackson and Sophia relaxed in the living room, occasionally coming in to grab drinks or sample appetizers. My father watched football, calling out scores periodically as if anyone was interested. When we finally gathered around the table at 4 o'clock, the spread was impressive. My mother's golden brown turkey cranberry sauce with orange zest, mashed potatoes with gravy, green bean casserole, sweet potatoes topped with pecans, homemade rolls and two kinds of pie, waiting on the sideboard. It was the same meal she'd made my entire life, comforting in its predictability. My father said grace, thanking God for family health and prosperity. We all murmured amen and began passing dishes. The conversation flowed more easily, now lubricated by food and the wine. Sophia had brought an expensive bottle that my father praised extensively. It wasn't until we'd all filled our plates and eaten the first few bites that the conversation turned to wedding plans. We finally booked the venue, my mother announced proudly. The Lake Club had a cancellation for June, and we snatched it up right away. It's absolutely perfect, right on the water, with that gorgeous view of the skyline. Sophia beamed. "It's where I always dreamed of getting married." My parents had their reception there 30 years ago. The Lake Club was one of Milwaukee's most exclusive venues, with a years-long waiting list and prices to match. I raised my eyebrows slightly, but kept eating. "And the honeymoon is all set," Jackson added, his mouthful of mashed potatoes. 3 weeks, Bali, Sydney, and the Great Barrier Reef. First class all the way. "Wow, that's quite a trip," I said. "Sounds amazing." "It will be," Sophia said. "We wanted something truly special to start our married life. Daddy is covering the flights with his miles, but the resorts are the real expense." There was an odd pause, and I noticed my parents exchange another look. My father cleared his throat. "Actually, we've helped with that part," he said, taking a large sip of wine. "The Bali resort was a bit over budget, but we worked it out." "That's generous of you," I said. "Those places must cost a fortune." My father nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "We managed to free up some funds." Another strange pause descended on the table. Jackson suddenly became very interested in buttering a roll, and my mother busied herself rearranging food on her plate. Sophia, however, looked directly at me. "Your parents are so supportive," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "They really went above and beyond to make this happen for us. Didn't they?" "Richard and Diana." My parents nodded uncomfortably. The atmosphere had shifted, tension crackling beneath the polite conversation. I felt a prickle of unease. Where did the extra funds come from? I asked lightly, trying to sound merely curious rather than concerned. I thought you were trying to pay down the mortgage before retirement. My mother laughed a bit too brightly. Oh, we've had some financial adjustments. You know how it is. What kind of adjustments? I pressed, the unease growing stronger. My father put down his fork with a small clink against the china. Well, since you asked, we made some decisions about underutilized assets. What does that mean? He exchanged another look with my mother, who gave a small nod. Then he turned to me with the matter-of-fact expression he used when explaining financial matters. We sold your car, he said flatly. You don't really need it in Chicago with all the public transportation, and it was just sitting in our garage most of the time anyway. We got $14,000 for it, which covered most of the honeymoon package. You'll get over it. The table went completely silent. I stared at my father, certain I had misheard. You sold my car, my Honda. I repeated, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Yes, my mother chimed in, as if confirming they had merely rearranged the living room furniture. We used your spare key, the one you left with us for emergencies. The dealer gave us a very fair price considering the mileage. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I put down my fork carefully, afraid I might drop it otherwise. You sold my car, I said again, still struggling to process. Without asking me, to pay for Jackson's honeymoon. Not the whole honeymoon, Jackson corrected, as if that made it better. Just the Bali portion. About 10 nights. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to laugh and tell me this was an elaborate if cruel joke, but my father's expression remained impassive. My mother looked vaguely uncomfortable, but not regretful. Jackson seemed slightly embarrassed, but not concerned, and Sophia was already moving on, serving herself more sweet potatoes. I don't understand, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. That was my car. I paid for it. I have the title. Well, technically, yes, my father conceded. But since we were storing it for you whenever you visit, we felt entitled to some compensation. And you can use my car when you visit now. It's not like you're stranded. How am I supposed to get back to Chicago? I asked, the practical implications suddenly hitting me. I drove here. I need to get home on Sunday. We can give you money for a train ticket, my mother offered, as if this resolved everything. Or Jackson could drive you, maybe. Jackson looked up from his plate, clearly unhappy with this suggestion. Sophia and I have plans on Sunday. Brunch with her parents. Sophia nodded. They're expecting us by 11. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall. This can't be happening, I thought. This can't be real. You had no right, I said, my voice shaking slightly. That car was mine. I worked for years to save for it. You stole from me. My father frowned. That's a very dramatic way to put it, Marissa. Family helps family. Jackson and Sophia needed this honeymoon, and you hardly used the car anyway. It's a much better allocation of resources. Better allocation, I repeated incredulously. It's not a resource to be allocated. It's my personal property that you sold without my permission. That's literally theft, my mother sighed dramatically. I told you she'd overreact, Richard. She's always been so attached to her things. I don't think I'm overreacting to having my car stolen, I exclaimed, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Keep your voice down, my father said sternly. You're making a scene over something that's already done. We'll give you some of the money eventually once the wedding expenses settle down. Some of the money, I echoed. The car was worth at least $15,000. I put down $12,000 plus all the payments I've made. We got 14 for it, my father said. And we've decided 8,000 is fair compensation considering we've let you store it here between visits. I stared at him in disbelief. So you're keeping 6,000 of my money too? Wedding expenses add up, my mother said defensively. And Jackson needed a new suit for the rehearsal dinner. The one he had wasn't quite right with the color scheme. I turned to look at my brother, who at least had the decency to look somewhat uncomfortable. But instead of apologizing, he just shrugged. It's not like you can't take the train around Chicago, he said. Lots of people don't have cars in the city. You'll adjust. Sophia nodded in agreement. Public transportation is very environmentally friendly anyway, she added with a patronizing smile. You're actually reducing your carbon footprint. Something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back from the table and stood up. This isn't about environmentalism or resource allocation. I said, my voice now steady with anger. This is about you taking something that didn't belong to you, something I worked hard for, something I needed and valued. You're being selfish, my mother said, her voice turning cold. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? I asked. Years of unequal treatment, suddenly crystallizing into a single question. You paid for Jackson's private university while I took out loans. You bought him a car at 16 while I got driving lessons. And now you've literally stolen my car to pay for his luxury honeymoon. My father's face flushed red. We've always treated you both fairly. A bitter laugh escaped me. That's simply not true, and I think you know it. I turned to Jackson. And you. Did you even question this? Did it occur to you that maybe taking your sister's car to fund your beach vacation might be wrong? Jackson shifted uncomfortably. They said you were fine with it. They lied, I said flatly. Nobody asked me. Well, what did you expect? Sophia interjected, her polite veneer slipping. Your parents wanted to give us the perfect honeymoon, and this was the only way they could afford it. You should be happy they're supporting our marriage. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Then I carefully placed my napkin on the table. It'll be in my room, I said quietly. Please don't follow me. I need some time alone. As I walked upstairs, I heard my mother call after me. You're ruining Thanksgiving, but I didn't turn back. In my childhood bedroom, I closed the door and finally let the tears come. Sitting on my narrow twin bed surrounded by high school track trophies and faded posters, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. My car, my independence, my hard-earned possession was gone, sold without my knowledge or consent to fund my brother's luxury honeymoon. The betrayal felt like a physical wound. I wiped away tears and tried to think logically. My purse sat on the desk where Edie left it earlier. With shaking hands, I opened it and searched for my keyring. The Honda key was missing. They must have taken it when I arrived, knowing I would discover their deception at dinner. A surge of determination pushed me to my feet. I needed to see for myself. Quietly, I made my way downstairs, avoiding the dining room where I could still hear conversation continuing as if nothing had happened. I slipped through the kitchen and into the attached garage. The space where ED parked my Honda last night was empty. In its place was a stack of storage boxes that hadn't been there when I arrived. They'd already rearranged things, erasing any evidence that my car had ever been there. The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. Back upstairs, I sat on my bed and tried to control my breathing. I needed to think clearly to understand the full scope of what had happened. My parents had taken my spare key, sold my car without permission, and planned to give me only a portion of the money. And they expected me to accept this as normal, even reasonable. Through the floor, I could hear the muffled sounds of dinner continuing, dessert being served, coffee offered. The familiar rhythm of family holidays continued without me, as if my absence and distress were merely an inconvenience to be ignored. After about an hour, a soft knock came at my door. I didn't answer, but my mother entered anyway, a boundary violation so familiar I barely registered it. You've had enough time to calm down, she said, standing awkwardly by the door. Your pie is getting cold. I looked at her, this woman who had raised me but somehow failed to see me as a person with rights and feelings equal to her son. I don't want pie, I said quietly. I want an explanation. And an apology. She sighed and perched on the edge of my desk chair. Marissa, I don't think you're seeing the bigger picture here. This wedding and honeymoon are important for Jackson's future. The Marshalls are very well connected. This marriage could open doors for him and for our whole family. So my car was sacrificed for networking opportunities, I said flatly. Don't be dramatic, she said with a dismissive wave. It was just a car. You can get another one eventually. With what money? The money you stole from me. We did not steal from you, she said, her voice hardening. We made a family decision about a family resource. It wasn't a family resource, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. It was my personal property that I paid for with money I earned. Would you sell Jackson's new BMW without asking him? That's different, she said automatically. How? She hesitated, clearly struggling to find a reasonable response. Well, he uses his car every day, and it was a gift from Sophia's parents. We couldn't sell that. But you could sell my car, even though I use it every time I'm home and even though I paid for it myself, I pointed out. Do you see the double standard? My mother stood up abruptly. I didn't come up here to argue semantics with you. I came to tell you that you're upsetting everyone with this tantrum, especially your father. He's very disappointed in your reaction. The familiar sting of paternal disapproval hit its mark, but this time, I refused to let it derail me. I'm disappointed too, I said quietly. I'm disappointed that my parents would steal from me, then try to make me feel guilty for being upset about it. I'm disappointed that my brother would accept a gift he knew was taken without permission. And I'm disappointed that none of you seem to understand why this is wrong. My mother crossed her arms defensively. We were going to surprise you with some of the money at Christmas. Some of the money I repeated. Not all of it. Not even most of it from what Dad said downstairs. We're helping you with the $8,000, she insisted. The rest needed to go to wedding expenses. Do you know how much flowers cost these days? And Sophia wanted a specific photographer who charges a fortune. What were we supposed to do? I stared at her in disbelief. Not steal my car would have been a good start. She made an exasperated noise. I can see you're determined to ruin this holiday. When you're ready to be reasonable, you can join us downstairs. After she left, I sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process everything. Then I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done immediately. I called my friend Taylor, who had become like family to me in Chicago. She answered on the second ring. Hey there, how's the family Thanksgiving? My voice broke as I tried to respond, and suddenly I was sobbing into the phone, the whole story pouring out in broken sentences. They sold my car, Taylor, without asking, for Jackson's honeymoon. They just took it and sold it. Wait, what? She sounded as shocked as I'd been. They can't do that. That's literally illegal. You own that car. Her outrage was validating confirmation that I wasn't overreacting. I don't know what to do. I admitted, I can't even get home now. I'm stranded here. Without hesitation, Taylor said, I'll come get you. I'm at my parents' in Indianapolis, but I can drive up tomorrow. It's only about 4 hours from here. I can't ask you to do that on Thanksgiving weekend, I protested weakly, even as relief flooded through me. You're not asking, I'm offering, she said firmly. Friends don't let friends get stranded with family who just committed grand theft auto. Pack your stuff. I'll text when I'm on the road tomorrow. After we hung up, I felt stronger. Someone was on my side. Someone understood that what had happened was wrong. I wasn't crazy or selfish for being upset. Downstairs, I could hear my father turn on the television, the familiar sound of a football game filling the house. My mother was probably cleaning up in the kitchen, and Jackson and Sophia had likely retreated to their room. Normal Thanksgiving evening activities while I sat upstairs dealing with the aftermath of their betrayal. I decided to confront them again, this time armed with the knowledge that I had a way home and support from someone who actually respected me. I found them exactly as I'd imagined: my father in his recliner watching football, my mother loading the dishwasher, and Jackson and Sophia cuddled on the couch scrolling through their phones. I need to speak with all of you, I said firmly, standing in the center of the living room. My father muted the TV with a sigh. Have you calmed down? No, I haven't calmed down, I said. And I shouldn't have to. What you did was wrong, and I think you know it, or you would have discussed it with me first instead of going behind my back. We made the best decision for the family, my father insisted. Sometimes being a parent means making tough choices. I'm not a child, I said. I'm 27 years old. That car was my legal property. We were planning to help you replace it eventually, my mother said from the kitchen doorway. Maybe next year once the wedding expenses are settled. With my own money that you stole, I pointed out. How is that helping me? Jackson looked up from his phone. Look, if it's such a big deal, Sophia and I could maybe give you $1,000 from our wedding gifts. Right, babe? Sophia didn't look pleased by this suggestion, but nodded reluctantly. I suppose we could, if it would stop all this drama. I don't want your money, I said. I want what was rightfully mine. Either my car back or the full $14,000 it was sold for. My father shook his head. That's not happening. The car is already gone and we've allocated the funds. $8,000 is our final offer, and you'll get it after the new year. Then I'll be taking legal action, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. What you did is theft, plain and simple. Taylor says I should file a police report. The room went silent. My mother gasped audibly. My father stood up from his recliner. You would call the police on your own parents, he demanded, his face flushing red again. If necessary, I said, though the thought made my stomach churn. I don't want to, but what you did was illegal. You sold property that wasn't yours to sell. We are your parents, my father said, his voice rising. We've given you everything. No, you haven't, I countered. You've given Jackson everything. I've worked for what I have, including that car. My mother started crying loud theatrical sobs that had always made me feel guilty in the past, but this time I stood my ground. This is how you repay us for raising you, she wailed. By threatening us with the police, I'm simply stating facts, I said. What you did was wrong both legally and morally, and I'm not going to pretend it's okay. Jackson stood up, finally looking concerned. You can't be serious about going to the police. I am serious, I said. Unless I receive full compensation for my car, I'm prepared to take legal action. Taylor has a friend who works at a law firm. She already texted me his contact information. This declaration was met with stunned silence. Then my father spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. If you pursue this, you will no longer be welcome in this house. The threat hung in the air. It should have devastated me, but strangely I felt calm. If that's your choice, then I accept it, I said. But it won't change the facts or the law. What you did was wrong, and there are consequences for that. I told them that Taylor would be picking me up tomorrow, and that I would be staying in a hotel tonight charged to my credit card. As I packed my things, I could hear them arguing downstairs, blame being thrown around, my name mentioned with increasing bitterness. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about their disapproval. I had drawn a line, and I was going to stand by it, whatever the cost. The hotel bed felt strangely comforting that night, a neutral space away from the emotional battlefield of my childhood home. I slept fitfully, but woke with a clarity I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about the car. It was about years of inequity, of having my needs considered secondary, of being expected to accept less and be grateful for it. Taylor arrived around noon the next day, giving me a fierce hug in the hotel lobby before loading my suitcase into her Subaru. As we drove out of Milwaukee, I felt both grief and relief washing over me in alternating waves. You okay? She asked, glancing at me as we merged onto the interstate. Not really, I admitted. But I will be. During the drive back to Chicago, I poured out everything, the long history of favoritism, the dismissal of my feelings and needs, the expectation that I would always accommodate while Jackson received. Taylor listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic noises. When I finally fell silent, she said, You know this isn't normal, right? What they did crosses so many lines. It's not just unfair, it's actually illegal. Her validation was like cool water on a burn. For years, it wondered if I was the problem, if my perception of being treated differently was just oversensitivity or jealousy. Hearing someone else confirm the wrongness of it all was powerfully affirming. So what are you going to do? Taylor asked as we crossed the Illinois state line. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Part of me wants to just cut my losses and move on, never speak to them again. You could do that, she acknowledged. Nobody would blame you. But another part of me feels like that would just continue the pattern, letting them act however they want without consequences. I continued working through my thoughts aloud. They need to understand that what they did was wrong, not just hurtful, but actually illegal. Taylor nodded. Consequences are important. Otherwise, they'll just keep doing this kind of thing. Back in my apartment that evening, the absence of my car keys on their usual hook hit me hard. I sat on my couch and allowed myself one good, thorough cry, the kind that leaves you exhausted but somehow cleaner inside. Then I made myself dinner, opened my laptop, and began researching. I started with the legal aspects. My name was on the title, the registration, and the insurance. The car was unquestionably my property. My parents had no legal right to sell it regardless of where it was parked. Using the spare key to access and sell the vehicle without permission constituted theft in most jurisdictions. The fact that they were family didn't change the legality, though it might affect how authorities chose to handle it. Next, I contacted Taylor's friend Mark, who worked at a law firm specializing in property disputes. Though he wasn't a lawyer himself, he offered to consult with one of the partners and get back to me. 2 days later, he called with information. So I talked to Sarah Bennett, one of our partners, Mark explained. She says this is pretty clear cut. Since the car was titled in your name, only your parents had no legal right to sell it. What they did constitutes conversion, basically civil theft. What are my options? I asked, taking notes on a legal pad. You have several, he said. You could file a police report for theft, which might lead to criminal charges. Or you could pursue civil action to recover the full value of the vehicle plus potentially punitive damages. Or you could send a demand letter from an attorney, which might convince them to settle without going to court. The thought of my parents facing criminal charges made me deeply uncomfortable despite everything. But I needed to stand firm on receiving full compensation. I think I'd like to start with a demand letter, I said. Give them a chance to make this right before escalating. Mark arranged for me to meet with Sarah Bennett later that week. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who listened to my story with growing indignation. Family or not, what they did was blatantly illegal, she confirmed, tapping her pen against her desk for emphasis. And their plan to give you only a portion of the proceeds makes it worse. That's like a thief saying, "I'll give you back half of what I stole, aren't I generous?" She helped me draft a formal demand letter using appropriately intimidating legal language, while laying out the facts clearly. The letter requested the full $14,000 from the sale, plus an additional $2,000 for the inconvenience and cost of temporary transportation. It specified a 30-day deadline for payment and outlined the legal actions that would follow if the deadline passed without resolution. As we finished, Sarah looked at me with kind but serious eyes. Are you prepared to follow through if they don't comply? Because sending this letter and then backing down will only teach them that they can ignore your boundaries. I'm prepared, I said, surprised by how certain I felt. This isn't just about the money. It's about establishing that I won't accept being treated this way anymore. Good, she nodded approvingly. Too many people let family get away with behavior they would never accept from anyone else. The letter was sent by certified mail the next day. While waiting for a response, I adjusted to life without a car, relying on public transportation and ride-sharing services to get around Chicago. It was inconvenient and expensive, adding to my determination to hold my parents accountable. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from family members. My parents apparently had shared their version of events, painting me as ungrateful and litigious. I let most calls go to voicemail, but was surprised when my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, called with a different perspective. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family thinks what they did was okay, she said when I finally answered. Your parents have always had different standards for you and Jackson. I've noticed it for years, but never felt it was my place to say anything. Her support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you for telling me that. I've been in your shoes, she continued. Your mother and I were treated the same way by our parents. She was the golden child. I was the one who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. I think she's just repeating the pattern without realizing it. This insight gave me a new perspective. Perhaps my parents weren't deliberately cruel, but rather blindly perpetuating the family dynamics they had grown up with. It didn't excuse their actions, but it helped me understand them better. A week after receiving the letter, my father called. I steeled myself before answering. This is completely unnecessary, he began without preamble. You could have just talked to us instead of involving lawyers. I tried talking to you, I pointed out. You dismissed my concerns and threatened to cut me off if I pursued the matter. He sighed heavily. Your mother is beside herself. She hasn't slept properly since that letter arrived. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely meaning it despite everything. But my position hasn't changed. What you did was wrong, and I expect full compensation. The conversation circled for nearly an hour, with my father alternating between anger guilt trips and attempts at negotiation. He offered $10,000 instead of $8,000, then $12,000, insisting they simply couldn't manage the full amount plus the additional $2,000. I remained firm. The car was worth $14,000 minimum. You received that amount, and all of it belongs to me. The additional $2,000 is fair compensation for the inconvenience you've caused and the cost of alternative transportation. Eventually, he agreed to discuss it with my mother and get back to me. 3 days later, he called again. Well, send the $14,000, he said stiffly. But not the extra two. That's our final offer. I considered briefly, then accepted. While I believe the additional compensation was justified, getting the full value of the car represented a significant victory. More importantly, it established that I was serious about enforcing my boundaries. The check arrived by express mail the following week. I deposited it immediately and began researching replacement vehicles. With the full 14,000 plus some additional savings, I could afford a newer, more reliable model than my previous Honda. Jackson called shortly after my parents sent the check. He sounded uncomfortable, clearly having been pushed into making the call. "Mom and Dad think I should apologize," he began awkwardly. "About the car thing. And do you think you should apologize?" I asked. He hesitated. "I guess I didn't really think about how it would affect you. I just assumed if they said it was okay, then it was okay. It wasn't your car to sell," I pointed out. "Didn't that occur to you?" Another pause. I didn't really think about it that way. I've always just gone along with what Mom and Dad say. For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my brother. In some ways, the golden child treatment had stunted him, leaving him dependent on our parents' approval and direction, even as an adult. "Maybe it's time to start thinking for yourself," I suggested more gently than I'd intended. "You're 32, Jackson, getting married, starting your own family. Do you really want Mom and Dad making your decisions forever?" He didn't have an answer for that. And the conversation ended soon after, with a half-hearted invitation to the wedding that we both knew I wouldn't accept. But something had shifted between us, a small crack in the dynamics that had defined our relationship for decades. Sophia called next, her voice syrupy sweet with forced friendliness. "Marissa, I just feel terrible about this whole misunderstanding. We never meant for you to feel hurt." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I corrected her. "It was theft. And it wasn't about my feelings. It was about my property and my rights." Her tone cooled noticeably. "Well, regardless, Jackson and I would still love for you to be at the wedding. Family should stick together. Don't you think I do value family?" I agreed. "But I value respect and honesty too. I'm not ready to pretend everything is fine when fundamental trust has been broken." She made a few more attempts at persuasion before giving up, her frustration evident in her clipped goodbye. I suspected her concern was less about my presence and more about the appearance of family unity for her parents and friends. Meanwhile, I used the money to purchase a certified pre-owned Mazda 3 with lower mileage and better features than my Honda had had. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Each time I drove it, I felt a sense of reclaimed independence. 2 weeks after the car purchase, my mother called, sounding tentative in a way I'd rarely heard. "Your father says you're not coming to the wedding," she began. "That's right," I confirmed. "But you're Jackson's sister. People will ask questions if you're not there. You can tell them the truth or make up an excuse," I said. "That's your choice." She sighed deeply. "I don't understand why you're still punishing us." "We sent the money. Isn't that enough? This isn't about punishment, Mom. It's about recognizing that what happened was seriously wrong and damaged our relationship. I'm not ready to play happy family at a wedding when I've had no acknowledgement of the harm done, no real apology, and no indication that anything would be different in the future." "What do you want from us?" she asked, sounding genuinely confused. "I want you to understand why what you did was wrong, not just legally, but morally. I want you to recognize the pattern of treating me and Jackson differently. And I want a genuine apology, not one that's forced or qualified with excuses." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if your father will ever be able to give you that," she finally said. "He's not good at admitting mistakes." "I know," I said softly. "But that's what I need before I can move forward." The call ended without resolution, but it was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. A small step, perhaps, but still movement in a better direction. As the weeks passed, I found myself feeling stronger and more centered. Standing up to my family had been terrifying, but ultimately liberating. For the first time in my life, I had established a boundary and held firm despite pressure, guilt, and emotional manipulation. The experience had ripple effects in other areas of my life too. At work, I spoke up in meetings more confidently and negotiated for a raise that was long overdue. In my friendships, I became more honest about my needs instead of always accommodating others. and I started seeing a therapist to work through the deeper patterns from my upbringing that had led me to accept unequal treatment for so long. Jackson and Sophia got married in June, as planned. I didn't attend, sending a modest gift card instead, with a brief but sincere note wishing them happiness. My parents sent stiff formal updates about the event, clearly still hoping I would change my mind about reestablishing normal family relations, without the difficult work of genuine reconciliation. It wasn't until Thanksgiving approached again that things began to shift more substantially. My mother called in early November, her voice hesitant. "We were wondering if you'd consider coming home for Thanksgiving this year," she said. "Your father and I have been doing some thinking and some talking. We we miss you." "I appreciate that, Mom," I said carefully. "But I need more than just missing me. I need acknowledgement of what happened and why it was wrong." To my surprise, she didn't deflect or defend. Instead, she said, "I understand. We did wrong by you, not just with the car, but in other ways too, for a long time." The admission, partial as it was, caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that. Would you be willing to come for Thanksgiving so we can talk more about it in person?" Your father finds these conversations easier face to face. I considered carefully, weighing the potential for real change against the risk of falling back into old patterns. "Is Jackson coming?" "No," she said. "He's spending the holiday with Sophia's family this year. It would just be us." That made the decision easier. "I'll come," I agreed, "but I'm driving my new car and am getting a hotel room, not staying at the house. I need some space of my own." She accepted these conditions without argument, another small sign that something might genuinely be shifting. When Thanksgiving arrived, I drove my new Mazda to Milwaukee, feeling both nervous and cautiously hopeful. The hotel room I had booked provided a necessary safety valve and escape if things went poorly, a signal that I was participating on my terms. My parents greeted me at their door with careful hugs, my father patting my shoulder awkwardly, my mother holding on a beat too long, just like always, but with a new undercurrent of uncertainty. The house looked the same, yet my perception of it had changed fundamentally. This was no longer the place that defined me, but simply the home where my parents lived, a distinction that felt important. Dinner was more subdued than previous Thanksgivings, just the three of us around a table that suddenly seemed too large. My mother had made all the traditional dishes, but in smaller quantities. After the pumpkin pie had been served, my father cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable, but determined. "Your mother and I have been doing some reading," he began, glancing at her for support. "About family dynamics and favoritism." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "It seems we may have been unconsciously repeating patterns from our own childhoods," he said, each word seeming to cost him considerable effort. "Your mother was treated as less important than her sister by their parents, and my parents clearly favored my brother over me." I glanced at my mother, who nodded confirmation, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We never intended to do the same to you and Jackson," my father continued. "But looking back, I'm forced to admit that we did. And that was wrong." The simple acknowledgement, delivered without excuses or justifications, was more powerful than I had expected. "Thank you for saying that, Dad." As for the car, he went on, his voice strengthening. "What we did was inexcusable. We had no right to sell your property without permission, regardless of our reasons. It was wrong legally, and it was wrong as parents, who should have respected your autonomy and hard work." I nodded, emotion making it difficult to speak. Sorry, Marissa," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "Truly sorry. For the car and for the years of treating you as less important than your brother. You deserved better." My mother reached across the table to take my hand. "We've spent a lot of time talking about this," she added, "about why we did what we did and how it affected you. We're seeing a family therapist, trying to understand our patterns better." This surprised me. My parents had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary handholding for people who couldn't handle their own problems. The fact that they were willing to try it showed a level of commitment to change I hadn't expected. "I'd like us to rebuild our relationship," my father said, "if you're willing to try. On your terms, with whatever boundaries you need." In that moment, I realized something profound. The car had been valuable to me, yes, but what I had truly fought for was recognition of my worth as an equal member of the family. And for the first time, I felt that recognition from my parents. "I'd like that too," I said softly. "But it will take time and consistency." We understand, my mother nodded. We're committed to doing better. Later, as I drove back to my hotel, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The relationship with my parents was far from healed, but the foundation for real healing had been laid: honest acknowledgement, genuine remorse, and commitment to change. In the months that followed, we began the careful work of rebuilding trust. There were setbacks and old patterns occasionally resurfaced, but there was also genuine effort and slow, steady progress. My parents continued their therapy, and eventually I joined them for a few sessions to work through specific issues together. Jackson and I began to develop a different kind of relationship, too, one less defined by our parents' favoritism, and more by who we actually were as adults. It was awkward at first, neither of us quite sure how to relate, without the familiar dynamic of golden child and afterthought. But gradually we found common ground and even moments of real connection. One year after the car incident, I drove my Mazda back to Milwaukee for another Thanksgiving this time, staying at my parents' house in a gesture of growing trust. Jackson and Sophia joined us their first year of marriage, having mellowed them both somewhat. The conversation was occasionally strained, but fundamentally different from years past, more equal, more respectful of everyone at the table. As we shared pumpkin pie, my father raised his glass in a toast. To lessons learned, however painfully, and to family bonds strengthened by honesty. We all raised our glasses, and I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, and probably never would be, but because we were finally seeing each other clearly and choosing to build something better than what had come before. The car that had been taken from me had represented independence and achievement. Its loss had been painful, but had ultimately forced a confrontation that was long overdue. And what I had gained in its place: self-respect, boundaries, and a more honest relationship with my family, was worth far more than $14,000, or any vehicle, no matter how beloved. It's been 5 years since that Thanksgiving, when my parents announced they'd sold my car to pay for my brother's honeymoon. 5 years since I drove away from them in tears, feeling betrayed and powerless. 5 years of rebuilding, reconnecting, and redefining what family means to me. The journey hasn't been easy, but it has been transformative. After our initial reconciliation, there were still difficult moments, times when old patterns threatened to reemerge, when I had to stand firm on boundaries, when my parents struggled to break habits of favoritism ingrained over decades. But with commitment on all sides and the occasional help of family therapy, we persevered. My relationship with my parents today is fundamentally different than it was before. There is more honesty between us, more mutual respect. They see me now not just as their daughter, but as an adult with rights, feelings, and autonomy equal to their sons. And I've learned to see them not as perfect authorities or cruel villains, but as flawed human beings doing their best to overcome their own upbringings. Those first steps towards self-advocacy changed more than just my family relationships. The confidence I gained from standing up for myself transformed other aspects of my life as well. At work, I began speaking up more in meetings, presenting my ideas with conviction rather than hesitation. 6 months after the car incident, I approached my boss about a promotion I'd long deserved, but had been too timid to pursue. To my surprise, she agreed immediately, saying she'd been waiting for me to step up and claim the role that should have been mine already. Now, I'm a senior marketing director at a larger firm, managing a team of 8 people with the same blend of firmness and respect that I learned to apply to my personal boundaries. My salary has more than doubled, allowing me not only to replace my stolen Honda with a nicer vehicle, but to purchase my own condo in Chicago, a small but beautiful space that is entirely mine. My friendships deepen too as I learn to express my needs instead of always accommodating others. Taylor, who drove 4 hours to rescue me that Thanksgiving weekend, remains my closest friend. But I've expanded my circle to include people who value reciprocity and mutual support, a chosen family that enriches my life immeasurably. Even my relationship with Jackson has evolved. After the initial anger and defensiveness faded, We had several honest conversations about our shared childhood and the unequal treatment that had shaped us both. To my surprise, he admitted that the constant favoritism had its own costs for him, creating insecurity and dependence that he was only beginning to recognize. When his first child was born 3 years ago, he called me specifically to say he was committed to avoiding the mistakes our parents had made. He wanted his daughter to grow up feeling valued for who she was, not for how she compared to any future siblings. The fact that he understood this, that he wanted something different for his own family, felt like a victory we shared. My parents, true to their word, continued working on themselves. They read books about family dynamics, maintained their therapy appointments, and made genuine efforts to change deeply ingrained habits. There were missteps and moments of regression, of course. Change is rarely linear, especially when it involves patterns established over lifetimes. But the car incident had broken something open between us, allowing light into places that had long been shadowed. My mother eventually confessed that watching me stand up for myself had inspired her to address some of the inequities in her relationship with her own sister, leading to a healing that was decades overdue. My father found it harder to articulate his feelings, but his actions spoke volumes. He began consulting me about financial decisions, respecting my expertise in areas where I had knowledge, treating me as an equal rather than a subordinate. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful in their consistency. Last year, when I mentioned casually that I was considering a weekend trip to a lakeside cabin to do some writing, my father transferred money to my account the next day. For gas and whatever you need for your trip, the message read, "No strings attached, just because you're my daughter, and I love you." The gift wasn't necessary or expected, but the thoughtfulness behind it moved me to tears. It represented everything that had changed, a father supporting his daughter's independence, rather than controlling her resources, giving freely without expectation of compliance or gratitude. As for me, the most profound change has been internal. I've learned that standing up for myself doesn't mean losing the people I love. It means creating relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear and obligation. I've discovered that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary for genuine connection. And I've found that my voice once used grows stronger with each honest expression. The car that was taken from me against my will became a catalyst for growth I might never have experienced otherwise. Its loss, painful as it was, forced me to confront patterns that had been damaging me for years. In fighting for what was rightfully mine, I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. Sometimes I think about that Honda Civic, wondering where it is now and who drives it. I hope it's bringing someone else the same sense of freedom and possibility it once gave me. But the lessons its loss taught me have been far more valuable than the vehicle itself could ever have been. Family relationships are complex, often laden with unspoken expectations and unexamined patterns passed down through generations. Breaking those patterns requires courage, honesty, and sometimes painful confrontation. But on the other side of that difficulty lies the possibility of connection based on truth rather than compliance, on mutual respect rather than control. If you're facing your own version of my story, a family that takes you for granted, boundaries that have been crossed, a sense that your needs always come second, I want you to know that change is possible. Speaking your truth may be frightening, but silence only perpetuates patterns that diminish you. You deserve to be seen, heard, and respected, especially by those who claim to love you. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary not just for your well-being, but for the health of your relationships. People who truly care for you may initially resist your boundaries, but those worth keeping in your life will ultimately respect them. And in that respect, you may find a deeper connection than compliance ever allowed. Have you ever had to stand up to family for your own well-being? What happened, and how did it change your relationships? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics with courage and self-respect. Your journey matters, and you're not alone on it. Thank you for listening to my story.